Dear friends, hello and welcome today to Ukraine. I am here with a series of BMP-1S in the rear near the strategic reserves. A lot of equipment hasn't been committed yet, so if the Russians break through, they're ready to attack and launch counteroffensives. I've seen VABs in this type of vehicle, but I hadn't examined this one closely until now. Plus, this isn't the standard BMP-1, so let's check it out immediately. So, the BMP-1 is a vehicle that was designed in the 1960s and was produced until 1986, get this, over 20,000 units. It's a troop transport vehicle that's not really armored. At best, it can handle small caliber rounds or shrapnel, but in the end it's just sheet metal, nothing more. The advantage, though, is that it's tracked, so it can go anywhere. Obviously, it's a vehicle that's widely used during the Rarest. The current situation is that we're at the beginning of November and it's not completely wet yet, but it's starting to get very complicated in some areas. So, what's interesting here is that this isn't the standard version of the BMP-1, it's the version called Sich. It's a 100% Ukrainian development that was presented in 2021 and actually started in 2018, in which they changed a lot of things. Instead of having a 73mm cannon like the original version, here we have a 30mm cannon, except that with armor-piercing rounds, etc. Like we have now, in the end, we get almost the same results, except that since they're smaller. Well, first of all, it costs much less, but on top of that, you can carry a lot more. You can have hundreds more shells than if you had 76mm shells. As secondary armament, we have a coaxial machine gun. Here, it's a 7.62mm machine gun, so it's a relatively standard machine gun, with a caliber a bit above an assault rifle. And then we have a 30mm automatic grenade launcher with no less than 116 rounds. And on top, there's the possibility to mount a missile, thanks to mounting points that are already provided, specifically for it. What's interesting is that we also have 2-axis stabilization, which means this vehicle can keep firing even while moving. We're talking about electronic equipment from the 2020s, so it's really something that's effective today, a bit like what we boast about on the Leclerc or the Leopard, etc. Well, the BMP-1S also have this capability. It got an upgrade to its armor. Now it can withstand 7.62mm bullets. It's still not 12.7mm, though. It's still not an armored vehicle, but nevertheless, it does have a good resistance capability. If we take a look at what's on the roof, those are the launchers. Galix, smoke launchers that allow the vehicle to be covered. For example, if it goes to a position for a medical evacuation or to drop off troops. There are a lot of small systems for observation. On the right, on the left, the famous traditional episcopes. So you can see 360 degrees the exits that are here. Here, the 30mm is not installed. So here you have the main gun that I'm touching, 30mm. And here you have the 7.62. And probably, I don't know if it's this one, but there will be the 30mm here, the grenade launcher. What's also interesting is that now the cannon can be remotely operated from inside. You don't need to stick your head out or put yourself in danger no matter what system you're trying to use. And then, when you look inside, it's clean, it's neat. Look, they look good. Look at that. So each crew has a view of the outside. Sorry, it's not very bright, but basically there's the possibility to communicate from the front to the back. They know where they are and aren't completely lost when they leave there. Just imagine. When the BMP-1 was designed, it was the first vehicle in the world that combined the kind of firepower you get from anti-tank weapons with the 76mm gun at the time and with troop transport in the back. They really did both at the same time, and there were also some pretty high ambitions. There's a well-known anecdote about it. When they wanted to present it for the first time, it was supposed to be amphibious, so they threw them into the water in front of the generals during the first demonstration, and some of them sank right away. So it's still a vehicle that can cross short rivers when it's properly sealed, but overall the first tests weren't really successful. Since it was widely and massively exported, it ended up in many theaters of operation. In particular, the first time it faced combat was with the Egyptians against Israel. Same thing in the war between Iran and Iraq. When Iraq attacked positions, they used this BMP-1 almost like a small tank, attacking fortified positions. So it still has a poor combat record, and that's why, despite being produced on a very large scale, it never really had any notable successes under normal conditions. And by the way, the Russians boasted about no longer using the BMP-1. That is to say, they had withdrawn it from service simply because it's a vehicle considered unsuitable. So the Russians today, they hadn't really withdrawn it from service, they had just put it in storage. And when you look at the balance of troop transports, how many troop transports they use, you can see how much the BMP-1 has come back to the forefront, because everything that was a bit more modern is now destroyed. And so they have a massive number of BMP-1TS, which are therefore even more dangerous for their soldiers. By the way, the BMP-1 in Afghanistan, the well-known saying was that it didn't provide any protection, it just kept even the dead warm. So now, if we talk about the losses of this vehicle in this high-intensity war in Ukraine, the Russians have lost 1,500 BMP-1s, even though they were supposedly no longer supposed to have them in their army. You remember in 2022, during the huge losses that was used as propaganda, they said, look at the photos you're sharing. It can't be Russians since they don't use those anymore. So now they've lost more than 1,500 BMP-1s, plus another 1,600 BMP-2s, and on the Ukrainian side, they've lost 600 BMP-1s, including about 30 of this modernized version. The same Russian propagandists say they weren't modernized, that they didn't exist. But the fire control system, I spoke with users here, is stabilized. It's really interesting. There's a laser rangefinder, there's an infrared optical camera, it's really a beautiful machine. If it were better protected, it would obviously be better. But when you look at the situation and troop transports, which are still often done with vehicles that are just pickups, it's still something interesting. They also say some guys go on the roof with a shotgun, since that's still the most effective way against drones. Here, there are no electronic warfare systems, but if deployed, after all, we're in the middle of nowhere. There aren't any windows. So, if it was necessary, they would very quickly bring in the electronic warfare systems to be able to send them to the front, just like the cannons are taken apart to be put on other vehicles, or even stored here, so they don't wear out quickly. So here there are 11 of them, and then around there are other hangars that I couldn't visit or show you. But passing by quickly, I saw that there were still quite a few armored vehicles available. But you have to keep this reserve in the rear. Sometimes it's hard to understand when you know how tough it is on the front line, but it's necessary, because if there's ever a breakthrough, you have to be able to stop it. While in the collective imagination, a breakthrough means that's it, it's over, it's over. In countries, in armies that don't have a reserve, but an army that does have a reserve, even if tomorrow there's a breakthrough, which I don't think is possible on the front given the situation, well, behind that, you would have columns of armored vehicles with men who are currently in reserve, who are trained and ready to act, and especially because the Ukrainians were expecting a major offensive during the summer of 2025, just like there was the offensive on Kharkiv in 2024 or at the beginning of the year, towards Sumy. Well, they are expecting exactly the same thing here. They were expecting the same thing, but the Russians didn't do it. And so in the end, some of these troops in reserve have been deployed. This allowed rotations, giving those at the rear some rest. But in any case, they have what they need, with modernized vehicles to go put out a fire if necessary, and to lend a hand if needed. All right, and then we also need to talk for 30 seconds about the BMP-2, which is the later version of the BMP-1. So here I'm showing you the Russian version that I have access to. We're in the center of Kyiv. Here there's a sort of collection of everything they've destroyed. So some Russian armored vehicles did reach Kyiv, and they're here, so here you see the BMP-2. The main difference is the cannon, which is a cannon of... Actually, it's a 30 mm machine gun rather than having a 72 mm cannon, which makes it lighter, easier to operate, and with more ammunition. Inside, they've slightly upgraded the armor and added different modernization kits. That's really the result of the bad experiences in Afghanistan, which led them to modify it by slightly improving the armor and so on. And finally, the Ukrainian BMP-1 that I showed you, the SICH, is more or less the same lesson learned as what the Russians did, just with a different name. They call it the BMP-2, but actually the Ukrainian BMP-1S are better than the modernized BMP-2. That is not the 1980s version, but rather the version from the 1990s and later. So that's a little feedback. There are plenty of other pieces of equipment. One day I'll show you all of that. This is the 2S1. I've already made a video about it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you very soon. As for me, go visit Kyiv, because despite the war, it's still a beautiful city. All right, I'll see you very soon.